Hello and welcome to the quick start part of the Artist Guide to Unreal. In this lesson, I'm going to focus on getting you into Unreal, getting familiar with how to look around inside Unreal, how to add some assets and build out a quick demo scene, and then also how to create renders so you know how to get into and out of Unreal as quickly as possible. So we're going to go through a couple of slides and then we're going to jump into Unreal itself. So the first thing I want to show you is how to get Unreal. We're just going to come to Google and we're just going to search Unreal Engine 5 and then we'll browse to the Epic Games website, and then up here in the corner you'll see we have this download link, and then we download the launcher, and once we have installed the launcher it will open something that looks a bit like this, which can be a little bit confusing the first time you see it, but up here where I have launch, you'll have install Unreal. So just click that install button and then let it go and do its thing. It could take up to an hour depending on your connection, and it will require up to 100 gigabytes of space. So you may want to clear out your hard drive before doing it for the first time. Okay, once you've got Unreal installed, then you need to download the project file for this lesson via the course page, and you should get a zip file like this. And you just need to extract that into your Unreal Projects directory, which is typically Documents, Unreal Projects. And then once you've got that folder unzipped, come in here, and then it's this U project file. Just double click on that and you will open up Unreal Engine. Now, if this is the first time you've opened Unreal, it will take a little while to do a process called compiling shaders. This is just the engine setting itself up so that you get real-time performance when it's active. So as you can see, for me, it's launching very quickly, and that's because I've already had this project open. So be assured, even if it takes quite a long time to open the very first time, the next time you open Unreal, the next time you work with a project file, it will open a lot more quickly for you. Okay, so here we are inside the starter project and the starter level or scene that I've created for you. And the first thing I'm just going to show you is how to look around inside Unreal. And one of the fun things you can do here is actually start playing in your level. So if I just click the big green play button up here, you see immediately a little character appears, and if I click one more time in my viewport now, when I move my mouse to the left or right, I'm looking around, and when I move it up and down, I'm basically controlling the camera. And now I can use the keyboard. I can use the W key to run forward. I can use the S key to run backward, the A key to run to the side, to the left, and the D key to run to the right. And so that's me all set up. I'm now running around this level and exploring it and this is one of the really fun things about working in Unreal. You can always actually go and explore the level, the space, the set that you're building from a kind of human perspective point of view, which I think is super fun. To get out of this mode, we just hit escape, and that'll get rid of the character and get us back here. So one of the things that you can do to look around inside Unreal is still hold down the right mouse button, and you can still kind of do that navigation. So this is almost as if where you are sitting in your viewport, this is what we call this little window on our world is the viewport. So it's like we're moving our head around and looking around. So I'm just holding that right mouse button, and it's allowing me as if I had my head in this scene just to look all around it. And then I can use my zoom, my mouse wheel to zoom in and out, to kind of move the camera in and out. And I can also hold down my left mouse button to look around on just one axis. And then as if I move my mouse while holding down the left mouse button, I can push the mouse forward to go forwards, pull it backwards to go backwards, and then I can still look around. So that's the kind of basics of navigation. I can still, if I hold down my left mouse button, I can still use those same navigation keys, the W, S, A, and D, and I've also now got Q, which will go down, and E, which will go up. So those are, again, a little bit different with Unreal. You've got this kind of video game controls to even navigate whenever you're building inside of Unreal. And they actually can be really helpful for getting around. If you're more used to another 3D software, you can still click on an object and orbit around it and do all that kind of normal stuff. Okay, so that's how to look around inside of our scene. This is our viewport window. Over here on the right-hand side, we have what's called our outliner. And basically everything that exists in our scene exists here also. So you may not be able to see it in your viewport, but it is here. So there's a number of the lighting objects here that are being highlighted. And you'll see as soon as I click on any object inside of my outliner, then I get further information in the details panel. And so every object has a series of details associated with it that you can make further adjustments to it. Now, this is one thing about Unreal that can be a little bit overwhelming in the beginning. There's an awful lot of options, an awful lot of menus, an awful lot of little tick boxes and numbers, and it takes a little bit of getting used to, and there's very little sort of visual delineation between what might be super important and you need, and what might be completely irrelevant and you're never going to touch. So generally speaking, I will try to show you the easiest, simplest way to do everything and avoid as much of the jargon and detail as possible. And one thing you can do to kind of make your life a little bit easier here, in any of these options within the details panel, if you right click, that will then appear at the top of your details panel for that particular object, or in Unreal we call objects actors. Actors is kind of the general term for all of the different things that are in our scene. So that's one little way that you can make your life easier. If you find yourself using one particular attribute over and over, you just right click and add it to favorites, and then it'll be at the top of the stack. So this is our viewport in the middle that we look around in the world that we're building in. This is our outliner with everything that's in our world, and this is our details to configure these objects or actors. There's one other part of the interface that's really important to know about, and that's this little box down here called the content drawer. If I click on that, it pops open this set of folders, and these are an exact representation of what's in your hard drive and included inside your Unreal project. One of the different things about working in Unreal is you're not working in like single project files like you would in Photoshop or Premiere or another 3D software, but projects in Unreal typically cover like a whole big sort of like everything to do with a certain project. You have multiple scenes and maps within one Unreal project. So it's a really big enclosure for like a lot of work. And that's just a conceptual difference between Unreal and other programs or applications. So what we have in here is these subfolders where we store important other information. So I've color coded a few of these to make it easier to kind of spot what's important. And so inside of the scenes folder, we have this level we're on, G start. And we also have a level that I've kind of completed. So let's have a little look at what we're actually going to build in this lesson, or something, your interpretation of this. So another little trick here I'm going to show you is when I click inside of my viewport, if I push the G key, it'll make all those little commands disappear, and I can now see a bit more clearly what I'm up to. So what we have here is our own little world, kind of a moon-based setup. We've got a spaceship flying in the air. We've got some nice landscape down here. And then we've got a few buildings in our scene. So this is a nice simple scene that we're going to be able to build here quite quickly. So let's have a quick look at our slides on building. We're going to talk about reference. We're going to talk about blocking. We're going to talk about adding detail, lighting, and then rendering is how we describe getting stuff out of Unreal. So these are the main steps that we'll kind of cover in a lot of projects or builds in Unreal. We want to always take a look at reference. One of the easiest things to do with 3D software in Unreal is build things that don't quite look right or aren't quite real. So we try to make sure we ground all our projects in reference, either from real life or from another movie or something else that will just help us make it real, make it feel more convincing and believable. So we're going to have a little look at reference. Then blocking is just, rather than getting into the detail, we start with big shapes like simple cubes, cylinders, and we kind of play around with the big shapes of our scene so we can get the composition right. And then adding in the details when we begin to like swap out those big basic shapes for the actual assets that we're going to use in our scene. Lighting obviously is super important. That's really makes or breaks almost any scene, how well lit it is. It can really make the difference between something looking fake and real. And then finally, the process of rendering. It's not completely obvious inside Unreal how to get something back out of it. So we'll make sure we cover off that so you know how to do a render from day one here. Okay, so let's go forward. Here's a few reference shots for what we're going to build. It's going to be a kind of moon base or space base. These are just a few quick ones I grabbed, but they at least give us some sense of lighting and geometry and, you know, the kind of terrain that we're trying to build here. Let's go back to Unreal now and have a little bit of a play around and start building out a scene like this. So I'm going to come back down to my content drawer down in my bottom left here. I'll click it once to open it. And I can use also Control and Space is a shortcut to be able to open and close this. Or if you want it open all the time, you can click this Dock in Layout button, and then it'll always be visually present on your scene. I prefer, particularly because I'm teaching on this single monitor, to have it hiding and appearing, but the choice is yours. So back in scenes, I'm going to come back to this G start level, and I'm thinking about building out that space scene. I think I'm going to go with this. The kind of terrain that I've got in the background of this level will work as a sort of moon-based background. So I'm going to focus on some kind of ships and things to put into my scene, buildings and that sort of thing. So I actually have inside of my kind of purple folder here, inside of my actors subfolder, these are the objects that we're going to be working with in this scene. We have some cylindrical buildings, we have some walkways, and we have a few vehicles. So I'm just kind of giving you that as a bit of a guide for our blocking out. So to begin blocking out, I'm just going to add some basic shapes. And this little button up here with the white square and the green plus, this is called our Quick Add button. And we get to almost everything we want to add to our project that's not in our content drawer through this. And you can see down here we have a shapes subcategory. And so I'm going to come in here and I'm going to grab myself a cylinder. And you see a cylinder pops nicely into our world. It's kind of popped into the middle of the air. So the cylinder is by default active, and we can tell that because it's got this orangey yellow outline on it. And we can see the location in the transform settings means it's kind of sort of in the middle of nowhere. So I'm going to go ahead and click this reset button, and that's going to return the cylinder to 0, but it's disappeared out of our view. So how to fix that easily is just hit the F key, and that frames us up on any object that's selected. So I've gone a little bit into the floor to do that. So I'm just going to pop back up. I'm holding down my Alt key to orbit. And then I'm going to grab, you see, as I roll my mouse over the different little axes gizmos, I've got my move tool active right now. And you can see I've got a rotation and a scale tool. I can hit the space bar to cycle through these, or I can hit W, E, and R to select them. So back to E, move tool, and I'm going to grab by the Z axis and pull this up. And in terms of the size, it is 1 meter. Is the units inside of Unreal are centimeters, and I know this is roughly 1 meter. So I'm going to increase it a little bit. I'm going to go 5 meters. And that will kind of give me a good scale starting point. We should also add in a little human as a reference. That's always a helpful thing when we're building. In order to get one of those, I'm going to click down to open up my content drawer again. I'm going to click on this top folder, content. And then I'm going to type in my search bar, and I'm going to type in MANNY and then SIMPLE. So that's Manny Simple. And when I type in that, I get this one guy here, this little sort of silvery robot dude, and I'm going to click and drag, and then we can bring him into our scene. And he is human scale reference, this mannequin, and because I started this project with a third-person game template, this asset is available to me all the time. So I actually think this is maybe a little bit small for the sort of detailed object we'll put in later, so I'm going to put that up to about 7. For my cylinder, and let's let me position this off here a little. And then I'm maybe going to add in kind of a block reference for my rover. So I'll again click on the white quick add button in the top here, white with the green plus, and then rolling down again to shapes again. And this time I'm going to select my cube. And I've got my 1 meter cube. This time I'll unlock the proportionality of the scale. And so I'll give myself a 3 meter by 2 meter car shape, and let's make it 1.5 meters tall. And maybe we'll have it, I've just switched to the rotational gizmo with the E key. We'll have the car kind of arriving in our scene here. And as we begin to block out, one of the other important things to do, as well as adding in a scale, is we really want to set a sense of where our camera is going to be for this shot. Because if we don't have a sense of our camera position, then we're kind of building a little bit, vaguely, and we're not exactly sure what we're going to end up with. So to add a camera to the scene is very, very simple. Just pop myself over here, and up here I have 3 little lines in my top left. Sometimes I call this the hamburger menu. When I click on this, it gives me the option to create camera here. And I want to choose this second option down, which is Cine Camera Actor. So that was the little 3 lines, the hamburger menu. Roll your mouse down to create camera here, and then second option, Cine Camera Actor. And what this has done is brought in a Cine Camera Actor into our world. And as we can see from this little preview, it's looking exactly where our viewport is looking right now. And if I just roll my mouse back a little bit, we can see there is this camera asset sort of positioned in 3D space. So we can see that's what we've just added to our scene, and that's where it's looking. Now, we could, like our shapes, use our little controllers here to position our camera where we want to. And occasionally it may be helpful to do this, but normally what I find more easily to position a camera is actually to change. You can see here we have this perspective view, and we can change to orthographic views like top, bottom, etc. But we now have this placed camera view, and I can click on this, and now I'm inside my camera. So I've taken over control of my camera. So now if I look to the left or the right, I'm actually affecting the camera's position in my scene. And so I'm framing up as if I'm the camera operator. I'm now moving my camera inside my scene. I've become the director of photography. And so I can set myself up with a nice shot here. And one thing I'm just using the W and S keys to move forwards and backwards. There's another little control up here, and it's called camera speed. And this is how big a change or how fast the camera is moving when we make adjustments. So whenever we're working on a larger scaled environment, we may want this to be up on a high number. But whenever we're like setting a camera specifically, we'll probably want to reduce this down. So I'm going to reduce that down, and then I can make much more small changes with my arrow keys here. Okay, so let's say I'm happy with this as my camera position. So I can eject the camera now, and you can see it's now in its new position, and I'm not affecting my camera now as I look around. I'm just holding down my Alt key to orbit my view here. And then I can easily jump back into my camera by just, again, clicking that perspective and Cine Camera Actor. Okay, so I'm going to position out, sort of block out a few more objects in my scene. I'm kind of going to put some of the larger buildings in the farther distance. So to get another cylinder, I could come back up to my quick add menu again, or if I hover over any of the move gizmos, I can hold down Alt on the keyboard, and I can just drag out another one of those. So I'll jump back into my camera to position this guy. And then again, I can hold Alt and click to drag out another one of those. So I can create a little cluster of kind of distant buildings. And another thing you may be noticing is our camera's field of view is super wide right now. By default, the Unreal camera is just below 12 mil. So if you want to adjust that, we just click on the Cine Camera actor, and then we can come down here and we have the current focal length setting. So I can type in here, I could put a 50 mil lens on if I wanted. But for this shot, I'm going to keep it pretty wide. I think I'll go to like an 18 mil. Will work for me. And if I wanted to, I can, rather than typing, I can just click and drag to change that and kind of frame the camera up. Again, it depends if you're working, on a real cinema project. You're not going to be able to get a 15.94 lens. You're going to want to stick with the actual physical lenses that you might be giving to someone to shoot with. But if you're just doing concept art or freeform creation at this stage, you can just have whatever lensing you fancy. At this point, I could continue to block out a little bit more detail and design a bit more of a complex scene, but as it's the quick start, we're going to keep moving forward, and then we're going to start to add a bit more detail with some of our actual geometry, our objects that are going to be in our scene. At this point, I'm going to save the progress I've made. So I'm going to do File, and I'm going to do Save Current Level As. And that just means I'll leave the G-Start level alone, and I'll save this as a different one. And you can see Unreal is calling this a level or a map. That's what it kind of calls the scene files. I call them scenes because that makes more sense to me. And that's why I've given you a little folder called scenes, but you could just as easily call this a maps folder. And indeed, sometimes if you're working with some of the demo Unreal projects, they will have a maps folder that have these levels saved in them where all of the layout and stuff is. So I'm going to call this now Blockout. And I can just jump back into my camera view again. And so now I'm going to bring in some of my actual assets from my project. So one thing you'll notice, search bars are all over Unreal, and they're super helpful for finding things, but they don't clear by default. So we've opened up our content drawer again, and now it seems like there's only one asset available in the whole world to us, and that's because we've still got this search term active. So I just got to click the X button, and that will clear that out and get me back to my sort of full view of everything that's available. So I'm going to come into my purple Mission to Minerva, and then I'm going to come into my actors folder, and then I'm going to bring in some of these actors to help build out some of the detail in this scene. So you can see here I'm clicking and dragging to reduce the height of my content drawer, and that'll just make it a little bit more easy for me to introduce some of these assets. So here's my little pod that's going to be in my front of my scene. So I can bring this in. You'll see we have like a snapping that's active by default. So the assets will sort of attach themselves to the floor kind of as you'd expect them to. So we'll pop this kind of in position here. And then I'm going to grab my rover here, and we'll bring him in. And then it's the same as before. If I want to get my rotation control, I can hit the E key. And now one thing to note here is my transform controls are still kind of orientating themselves around the world, which often can be helpful, but in this case, what I actually want to do is switch it here. There's this little button here, and I can flick. Sorry, that's my snapping. It's this one here. So this is the little button I can use, and that will switch my gizmos to be specific to my object. So rather than having to trail this rover around sort of and roughly kind of awkwardly figure out how to slide it back into position, instead of that, I can click this little button, and then I get it sort of local to the vehicle, and so I can kind of pull it back to begin to position it as I would like it in this scene or shot. And it's the X that I kind of want to pull it back a little bit farther, so I can either manipulate the locational numbers here, or I can just pop out of my camera view and I can just position myself a little bit better. I can just pull that back into shot. And if you want to have a look at your camera view whilst you're positioning with a different perspective, if you just click on your camera in your outliner, Cine Camera Actor, you see the little preview appears down here, and I have this little pin preview button, so I can click that, and it means now I can click on my rover and I can drag it back in the scene, but I can still see how much of it is visible in my shot here. And so at this point, I can delete my little blocking references. So in order to kind of build up a little chain that I can go back through my project, rather than deleting these straight off the bat, I've called this blocking out. So I'll just do another save. I'll do File, Save Current Level As, and I'll call this Detail. Saving has reset our view to be stuck inside this building, so I'll just quickly jump back in my camera actor again there, and I can delete these ones out, beginning to build up a little bit of a sense of my scene. And now I can bring in some of the more distant objects. So I'm going to get this big building here, the third object in. I'm going to bring it off into the distance. I'll just pop out of my camera view again, and I'll just select my camera and pin that view once more. And because I am working at a larger scale now, I'm going to increase that camera speed again. And that'll just help me move around a bit faster. So I'm positioning this right in my landscape, and it's still looking a little bit bigger than my block out scale, so I'm just going to go ahead and lock the proportionality again, and I'll drop it down a little bit. 0.5 looks a little bit better in terms of the scale in my shot. And again, I'll just use that Alt key, hold down Alt key and drag on the gizmo to create an additional copy. And once again, that's nicely positioned now. I'll go ahead and delete these, just using Shift, holding down Shift to select them all at once, using my delete key to remove them. I think I may just bring this guy a little bit farther away from the camera. And I'm going to use my E key and I'm going to rotate it around. There's a little kind of port here, or doorway we can see that's part of this building. So I'd like that in my shot. And I think I may drop it into the ground a little as well. Now within the supplied assets, I also have these walkways. So these walkways connect up quite nicely to the building here. And once again, I'll just use my F key, and that will position me in nice and close to that particular piece of geometry. I can pull this around. E key again to get my rotational tool active. Mouse wheel to zoom out a little. Drop this down a little bit below just for composition's sake. And I'll take back on my full camera view just to play around with this a little bit farther. Maybe grab these three buildings now and bring them over the other side of the composition. So feel free to go wild here, experiment with adding as many of the objects in and building out a really nice rich moon base or space base. But that's going to do it for me of this stage of adding in these larger objects. What I want to look at now is kind of the floor and the space around these objects, because everything's looking very kind of flat and fake at the minute. So the object that is giving us this landscape is the landscape object here in the outliner. And so what I'm going to do to make it look more real is I'm going to add what's called a material. And the material will go into a lot more detailed materials, but it's just going to cover up our geometry, this whole landscape, with a much more believable material. At the minute we have this kind of weird grey checkerboard on it, which is making it look very fake. So to add in our material, I'm going to come into my little materials subfolder, and you can see we have a large number of materials associated with all of these different lovely space objects and base objects. But down here at the bottom, there's one called Terrain C, and that's the one I'm interested in. So with that highlighted, I can actually close my content drawer, and there's a little magical tiny button here, which is like an arrow with a circle. And this just means whatever you've got active in your content drawer, load into this spot. So it's something I use quite often to load materials into objects. You can drag and drop sometimes, but it can be a little bit tricky to get it right, whereas this way is pretty much foolproof. So I'll click my button, and we can see immediately this looks a lot better. There are a number of different settings that we could play with to improve this. But for now, I'm just going to keep it super simple. We're just going to dump that one material on here. But I still don't feel like this looks very much like the surface of the moon. I want to add in some better rocks, some more detailed bits and pieces, a bit more in line with my reference, so this looks a little bit more convincing. So the great thing that's included with Unreal is something called the Quixel Bridge. And Quixel are an entirely separate company, also owned by Epic, who go out and take photos of the world and create these high quality photogrammetry scans of assets all over the place. And the great news is all their hard work is included for you for free inside of Unreal. So I just come up here again to this lovely quick add button, and I'm going to choose now this second option down, which is Quixel Bridge. I'm going to click on that, and it's going to open another little dialog for me. You may have to log in if you have not done that already. You need to log in with the same email you did to set up your Unreal account at the beginning of that. Whenever you created your Epic Games account, make sure you log in with the same email, and then you'll get all the assets inside Quixel Bridge for free. So here we are inside Quixel Bridge. I will go into a lot more detail on this in another lesson, but for now, we're just going to go and look for some spacey rocks. So I'm going to go to Collections, Environment, Natural, and then down here, I have Iceland. And if you've ever been to Iceland, you know it does look a little bit like the surface of the moon. So we're going to use that to our advantage, and we're going to grab some of these assets. Now you'll see here there's a mixture of surfaces. that you can apply and rocky ground. And the great thing here is inside of the bridge we get a sense of how big these objects are compared to a human. We also learn if they are open or closed and if they're single objects or a group of objects together. So we can kind of come through here and try and find things that are going to work good for us. You can see this is a surface, 2 by 2 meters. Here are some boulders. And this looks nice. This is a kind of nice kind of ground cover type asset here. We get to choose what quality we download it in. I'm going to stick with medium quality because that will be nice and fast to download and to work with. So I'm going to choose download. When you download something, it doesn't automatically get added to Unreal. It gets added to your local Quixel bridge. So if we want to actually use this in our project, we need to go ahead once we've downloaded it and click the blue add button. And what's that done is opened up an alternative view of our content browser, the one that we've been getting to down here. And it's showing us that we now have a new folder added to our project, which is Megascans. And then there's a subfolder 3D assets. And then within that, there's Icelandic rock. And here is the new object that we've just added. So I can minimize my Quixel bridge and I can click and drag and drop this in. And I'll just close this out. And this is an awful lot more realistic looking than our flat floor. So I can also scale this up. And then I can kind of sink it into the ground a little and begin to sort of build up a little bit more of a realistic floor. Again, I can hold my Alt key. I can drag out a copy. I just slightly changed my camera view there by accident. That is something that can happen and is a little bit annoying. Unfortunately, there's no undo. We can use Control and Z to undo positioning and changes and all that kind of stuff, but when we move our camera, there isn't actually an undo for that. So one way we can save ourselves from pain in that area is if we look for our camera. I'm just using the search bar at the top, and then when we highlight our camera in the outliner, I can right click, I can hover on transform, and I can choose lock actor movement. And you see we get this little extra locked at the top, and now even if I click and try and move it, I will not be able to move it. So I'll have to eject it to be able to look around other areas in my viewport, but it's one way of making sure you don't accidentally move your camera somewhere you don't want it. So once I've recycled that asset a few different times, I'll maybe go ahead and pick another one. I can also play with the scale a little for other variation. And I had this guy in just for scale reference, so I can hide him if I want to just focus on the rest of my composition. In order to do that, again, because I have this search term active, I've got to close that out to see what I've got selected in my outliner. And I've got this little shy button that will just hide him temporarily for me. But I can just go ahead and delete him if I want to now and get him out of my sight. So let's grab one more boulder asset from Quixel Bridge. And I stayed in my Iceland collection here, and that's going to give me sort of good consistency across different ones. There's another rocky ground here. I'll go ahead and download that. And again, I'll add it. I'll minimize my Quixel Bridge. I'll click and drag and drop in . So I could continue to add in a number of different assets from the bridge and add farther and farther detail to this scene. But again, because we're in the quick start, we're going to move along We're going to look at the next important step before we do our render, and that is lighting. Right now, all of the scene and environment is being lit by basically our sun that comes with every project that we open inside of the levels. There's a kind of default sky setup. I've made a slight adjustment to it to give us this kind of infrared look, but it's this directional light which is kind of in control of most of our scene lighting. And if we want to play with the position of it, we can manipulate its rotational controls down here, but there's a fun little gizmo. If you hold down Control and L on your keyboard with your viewport active, Control and L, and you'll see you get this little gizmo appears, and now you can play with the blue bar. Is you can see there's the sun is flying around as it pokes through the clouds. There we go, there's the sun there. So we can begin to position it somewhere that we think is going to enhance the sort of storytelling of this scene. Maybe we want a kind of lunar sunset, a bit more of a dark kind of time of day. You can see there's some lighting coming from our little rover object there, which is cool. So my light is now at about 1.47. So again, if you can't quite land it exactly where you want it, you can play around with some of these, like say 2, drops it down a bit lower, 1, a lot higher, so I think 1.4 kind of works for me in this scene. And then before I start adding too much more lighting to this, I want to take control over the exposure of this scene. And one thing that Unreal does, because it's a video game engine, firstly, it thinks you want to make a video game where it never gets too dark or too light. And it has a sort of built-in auto exposure. So we kind of have to take control of that. And one way in which we can do that is with something called a post-process volume. Don't worry about the name of it, just add it to your scene. And I'm going to show you a little trick to add it. You can come down here through volumes, but one other little hidden option inside of our quick add button is we can actually search. So in order to get that search bar is completely hidden and you have no way of knowing it's there, but if you just click on quick add and don't do anything, but just use your keyboard to type and type in post, and there you go, post process volume is what we want. So I can click on that and you can see we get this little sort of wire framed yellow box. And what we can use post-process volume for is adding like locational specific looks, but I don't want to use it for that. I want to use it to cover my whole scene. So to do that, I just have to set it to be unbound. So you can see if I search for UNBOU, I get this infinite extent unbound. So I'm going to check that on. And now I have an exposure setting in my post-process volume. And I need to activate this option on metering mode. And I'm going to change it from auto exposure to manual. Don't worry, everything goes dark. It's just the way it is. But I can activate my exposure compensation. And I can just roll this up until I kind of get a level of light that I am excited about, that I think is going to work for me. It's probably somewhere between 11 and 13 is going to be what I kind of want. And so as I said, I'm getting some lighting for free from my little rover here and my little building on the side and these kind of glowing parts of our terraformer objects in the distance. But what I want to do is just add a few of my own lights just to show you quickly. We're going to do, again, a lot more detail on this in the future. But again, my quick add button at the top, and then inside of lights, I'm just going to pick this very simple point light, second option down, and that's going to create for me this little light bulb icon, which is going to give me some lighting in my scene. I'll jump out of my camera view again, and I'm going to position this light over here on my little walkway that I've got. I think that would be quite likely you'd have some lighting on this walkway. Switch this little gizmo, and I'm going to change the color of it here. You can see light color. I'm just going to change it to be a more kind of slightly purple tint to it. Going to hit OK to that, and then again I'll use that Alt key and I'll drag out another light and another light, and I'll jump back into my camera just to see how that's looking. So it's giving me a bit more lighting over there in that part of the scene, kind of drawing the eye in a little bit farther. A couple of these might be enough. Yeah, that looks a little bit better balanced. And so another issue I'm having now as I look at the scenes, it looks very like perfect. Like I can kind of see from right in front of me to really far away, and that just feels a little bit fake. So in order to fix that, I'm going to play with a setting inside of my height fog. You can see inside of my lighting folder, I've got an actor called exponential height fog. So when I click to select that, I've got a couple of settings. I've got fog density here. A little bit further down, I've got this volumetric fog. So I'll activate that, and then I'm going to increase my fog density. So if I click once, it kind of highlights the numbers that are there. I can hit Control and C to copy those just so I keep them. And then I can try increasing this, so I can try 10. And that's a lot of fog now in my scene. Probably way too much. Try 1. And that's beginning now to look maybe a little bit better. These sort of distant terraformers definitely feel like farther away. But I've got a bit of light in my foreground here. Maybe try 0.5. So something around that is probably going to be good for me. Again, I'm just going to hit that G key just to kind of clear out my scene a little bit. So now I've got some lighting in my scene. I've taken control of my exposure. I've played with the fog a little, and I think I'm ready to try a render out of this particular setup. I'm going to do a quick test render. The very fastest way to do that is, again, just using this little 3-line hamburger menu, and we've got this high resolution screenshot option. If we click on that, we get an option to increase the multiplier. So probably go 2 times and then click capture, and that will quickly save you out a little file from this. So it won't have any of the more sophisticated render settings that we'll be able to do later through the movie render queue, but it is getting you a quick output from Unreal so you can share with a colleague or as a work in progress. So that's the very fastest way to do a render, is just use the high resolution screenshot. And then now I'll show you how to use the movie render queue to create a better quality render. So in order to create a render inside of Unreal, I have to create something called a level sequence. And in order to do that, I just have to come back down to my content drawer, open it up, and if I come to my top level, you can see I've made you a green folder called sequences. So if I double click inside of that, there's one sequence I already made for you. But if I right click inside of here, so inside your content drawer, it's always right click to get anywhere and do anything. And then if I come down here, there's an option here called cinematics. And in the flyout menu, I want to take that second option, level sequence. Normally when we're calling things, when we're naming things in Unreal, we want to use something to help us remember it, because there's so many different types of objects and things we'll be making. The kind of convention is to just use the first 2 letters of the name to be what this is. This is a level sequence. So I'm going to put ls in. It just means if I'm ever searching in a project or I get things a little bit lost, I can always just know that I'll have those first 2 letters to help me find whatever it is I want. And then I'll give it a name. So I'll just call this render 01. And then I'll double click and that will open up a little sort of timeline for me. The one last thing I need to do before I can render is add in my camera. So I'll click from the outliner, drag and drop it in here. And that gives us our camera and our cuts track. So now I've got my sequence set up. I'll just save it with this little icon here. I don't need to do anything more. And then you'll notice up here, there's another tab called Movie Render Queue. If for any reason you can't see that, you might need to come to Edit. If for any reason you can't see that, come to Edit, Plugins, and then search for Movie Render. And you'll see there's a red icon with a little plug, and you need to tick that on if that wasn't ticked. And then you'll have to restart Unreal, but don't worry, it'll come back to where it was. So inside the movie render queue, to set up a little render, I click the plus icon, and I'm going to click this render 01 we just made. And then I'm going to click on the settings tab or the settings column. And you can see it's offered me a JPEG sequence, and this is where it's going to save it. So I'm going to set up where I want to save out my file to. I've already got a folder set up in my Quickstart lesson. I'll select that folder. 1920 by 1080, that's a 1080 frame. I just want to render one rather than that whole sequence. So I'm just going to activate the custom play range, choose 0 to 1. And then I'm going to add in a couple of extra settings just to make things look a little better. You don't have to do this, but typically it will improve the quality. I'm going to add some anti-aliasing. I'm going to set that to 1 and 12 as a starting point and just activate that little override button. And then I'm going to choose one other setting in here, which is just called deferred. Sorry, not deferred, but game overrides. So I'm just going to turn that on and leave it alone. So now I'm going to save out my HD frame, just one frame as a JPEG, and it's going to go into my local drive. So I could, if I wanted to, save this as a little preset for me, so I don't have to do that all the next time. So I'm going to do save as preset, and we'll call this, we're going to go inside our sequences. I'm going to make a new folder in here called preset. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to call this, just highlight all that, delete it, HD, one frame, AA12, 1-12. And it's a JPEG. And those are just the settings summarized so I know what those are in future when I'm picking that preset. I'm going to click accept and I'm going to click render local. Unreal is just going to prepare itself for that render by compiling some more shaders. So our render is now complete and we can come to our Explorer and we can find wherever that was we saved that to. Well done for getting through the Quickstart lesson and getting your first render out of Unreal. Great job. I'll see you in the next one.